Good morning and thanks for joining the session. I'm Fay Cooper. I'm the head of product for our new directorate in DWP, which is shared channels experience. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but also essentially just all around the work we're doing to join up the customer experience. So there's loads of work going on in this space. So as Rachel said, please drop questions in the sidebar. Put your hand up. I don't mind kind of pausing as we go if that works for people, or we can do a Q&A at the end. So the first thing I just wanted to cover, so Rachel covered a little bit of this. So we are the largest government department. We pay around, just under £200 billion every year to customers, which is a huge, phenomenal amount of money. And when I first joined DWP 3 years ago, that was terrifying to me. The scale of what we do is huge. But the big thing for me on this slide is just around the volume of people. So 20 million people use our services every year. And within that 20 million, obviously, there's a huge diversity. There are younger people, older people, there's every range of digital skill. So when we talk about all the people, I feel like our services do cut across all demographics as well. So when we talk about joining up customer experience, we're trying to join it up for lots of different needs, skill levels, lots of different outcomes people are trying to achieve. And I think that's a really key thing. The diversity is really driving our approach, which is perhaps different to other organisations. So in 2020, we set up a new directorate, Shared Channels Experience, and ultimately we created that. And it was a really big thing for DWP because it was around thinking about what do we currently have and how do we currently deal with customer experience. It was traditionally a very decentralized thing. So all of our product teams were responsible for the experience within their product line. All of our service delivery teams responsible for, experience in their part of the journey. But nobody had taken accountability for the end-to-end customer experience across the whole department. So this is kind of a new way of thinking about, we need to consider what we call the common customer experience. What do people experience over and over again, and how do we meet those needs? When I talk about customer experience, it's probably really worth just pausing to really explain what do I mean by that. So for customer experience, it really boils down to the perception that a person has of our organisation and how they feel when they use our services. I think that's a really key word. So what's the sentiment when they come to us? And customer experience is built up over every single interaction that a customer has. So again, that idea of decentralizing is a really tricky one. You can't control the experience if you decentralize it. Does everyone want to go on mute? I think somebody not on mute there. So the customer experience, we really started to ask ourselves when we set up shared channels, is it where we want it to be? So this idea of sentiment really drove, our approach. So we started to think about how do people feel when they use our services, and some of the biggest themes and the biggest sentiment that came out. So we used some social media analysis tools. We worked across the department to understand what our service teams were telling us in operational delivery, in digital. We started to combine a lot of our research. And the things that came out were stress and anxiety, the two biggest sentiments by far. And everyone's heard that thing of the fear of the brown envelope. If you get a brown envelope through your door, people get nervous. And people typically don't use our services at a good time in their life. So usually it's because something's changed. Maybe they've got a new health condition, or they've lost their job, or maybe their family has changed, they've separated. So typically people come to us in an already stressed or anxious state. And we started to think about, well, what are we doing to potentially make that worse? And also, obviously, key, what can we do to make it better? So we weren't happy. So setting up shared channels experience was a way of acknowledging that things weren't as a happy day case as we wanted, and how could we start to move to a better place? So our vision within shared channels is to simplify experience. We know that one of the biggest reasons people call us and get stressed are around things like progress chasing. They don't understand the information they've been given in a letter. So we're driving a lot of contact because of the complexity of the notifications we send people, and because of the complexity of the number of stages that people go through. So we know that when people are anxious, they have what we call like a very low cognitive load. They can't take in a lot of information all at the same time. So we're starting to think about how can we drip feed information so that people have the information they need at the right time to take the next action. So we don't want to tell them at the start of their journey, you know, you need to complete 60 steps, because that's just too difficult for them. And that drives a lot of this anxiousness of, am I doing the right thing? Am I following the process? So focusing on simplification is a really big thing for us. Focusing on inclusiveness, another really big thing. We know that, as I said at the start, within the 20 million, we've got every single range of digital skill. So there's no drive for us to put everything online and sort of switch off of the channels. We're really keen to understand how can we support people through all of their needs, whether that's a digital inclusion need, it could be a data poverty need, it could be an accessibility need. So how do we understand that? And then ultimately, we want to have consistent experiences. So it doesn't matter what your needs are, what your skill levels are, we want your experience to be the same as somebody else. And this idea of consistency, just in terms of the look and feel of our services, but also the level of service you get, we want to obviously be consistently positive in that. So our mission and how we think we'll get there is all around what we call life event centric. So really understanding our users, their life, their journey, what are they trying to achieve when they come to us? So there's been a huge drive to really understand what are the life event drivers for somebody, why do they come, and start to plan those out to journey, model those. As I've said, simplification is a really key driver for us. So looking at how can we provide a single view of all of a customer's interactions, and how can we simplify their journey so that if they're trying to do maybe two things, we have 33% of our benefit claimants claim more than one benefit. So how do we support them to make that a single journey rather than two multiples or three multiples, depending on the combination? And then the big thing about reusability. So how can we share data, share events, and share services for that person? And, you know, the key thing for us is obviously have a customer just tell us about something once, and then how do we reuse that across our service teams? We're really focused on being very experimental in our approach. So not being too scared to try new things. A lot of the things we want to do within this space is new. There's not a lot of people have come together in the way we have. We're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible for data sharing, simplification. We have very complex policies that underpin all of our services. So we're starting to think about how can we hide that from a customer and make the experience seamless for them. So we're really focused on collaboration. So collaboration internally with people like our policy team or legal team, across our digital groups, so all of our digital service teams, across our operational delivery team. So we're trying to bring everybody together to have a single focus on what the experience should be and how we can help support and enable that. And for me, the really big foundational thing is that we want to build and evolve brilliant teams that have fun. And I think fun is really important. Like, we're dealing with very intense topics. It's a very experimental landscape, so things are going to go wrong. We just want our teams to feel empowered, like they can try new things, and that feeling, you know, an idea not working out isn't a failure. It's actually really valuable learning. So we do try to put a lot of emphasis on well-being and, you know, keep that kind of fun going through our work. So some of the places that we've started are around bringing together our common capabilities. So within our department, we've started to fragment our digital delivery and break everything down into what we call common components. So these are all microservices that service teams can then take up and embed within their product and their own journey. So within shared channels, we've taken on what we would class as all of the customer facing touch points. So things like notifications, how we deliver those. So things like text message enablement, better ability to manage and maintain your letters and get those sent out, emails. We've also got evidence uploads. So in the future, we want to help customers upload video content, and any kind of multimedia content. We've not done that before, so starting to think about evidence in new ways is really important for our service teams. We're looking at identity and trust, so how do people verify who they are when they come to us? So we're looking at biometrics in the future. We hope to use things like facial recognition. We want to move away from the traditional, we've got 3 questions that you have to answer. And the other big area we're looking at is around user interfaces. So we're looking at how do our services look and feel, both for our internal colleagues and for our external customers. And we're trying to think about how do we drive consistency in those user interfaces. And the key thing, as well as all of our channels, so we've brought together all of our channels around telephony, web chat, asynchronous messaging, which I'll touch on. But I think that organizational structure was really important for us. So we've got a lot of control of the customer facing touch points, means that that's one key way that will drive consistency by building those services that are reusable. So our channel strategy is all around how customers will interact with us in ways that are appropriate to their circumstances. So we know that for some simple inquiries, some people would rather self-serve. As inquiries get more complex, and particularly in this multi-benefit environment, people often want to speak to somebody because, you know, maybe one part of their benefits changed, another part hasn't. As I said, our policy rules are very complex, so sometimes navigating those is difficult for our customers. And simple things like a change of address, we hear this all the time. Can't we just allow somebody to change their address online? Well, we could, but for some of our benefits, a change of address is just an administrative thing. For others, it basically affects entitlement to a benefit. So starting to really think through where's it appropriate to self-serve and where are things more complex is something that's really kind of key to our full strategy. And our channel framework starts to look at opening up lots of different opportunities for customers to interact. And where we're starting to open up opportunities, so things like web chat, asynchronous messaging, we're trying to introduce more choice. But at the same time, the key driver for us isn't just to offer, you know, as many channels as possible. It's to allow people to move between channels seamlessly. So imagine a journey where somebody's online, digitally self-serving, and then they have a question, something becomes quite complex, they don't understand. We want them to then perhaps move to a web chat and interact with us, or pick up the phone if that's the right thing for them. So making sure that data flows between those channels is really key, and this omni-channel is the reason why we're taking very small incremental steps. So we're not moving to just introduce all channels all at the same time. Whenever we introduce a new channel, like we've introduced web chat in our child maintenance service just last Christmas, we're making sure that that information flows so that our colleagues in the contact centre can see the web chat, for example, and that if somebody rings, they'll be able to understand where the customer had got to in their journey. And I think that's a really key thing as well. So some of the other areas we've started to look at, so some of this work predates the establishment of shared channels, but we had a team, the service strategy team, start to look at what we call orientation. So starting to really think about our end-to-end journey, back to kind of the point of omni-channel, never losing sight of the citizen through the whole thread of their experience is really the key. And we know that a lot of this starts with the first point of contact and how they orientate into us. So we've got around 150 policy products, and that's traditionally how all of our content was structured on gov.uk. So things like all of the different state pension or retirement benefits were listed. And I don't think anybody ever woke up in the morning and said, you know, what I really need today is to talk to someone about a Christmas bonus or a benefits calculator. But you can see in our A to Z that it's not really going to work, because if somebody lands on the page, they're not going to know what they need, and they're going to have to navigate through a very long alphabetical list and still might be none the wiser, because a lot of the things listed were policy names rather than around a user need. So we basically found that lots of people were confused, were calling us up, were trying to kind of navigate through, and there was a lot of failure demand as a result. So one of the things we really focused on is how could we help people get what they needed faster, reduce the confusion, and ultimately start to increase trust in DWP, and how could we pay people more accurately. So the service strategy team came up with a list of 9 core services. So things like get support because of a health issue, get support because of caring for somebody. And the user research really showed that that was a really positive thing. Users responded really well to those groupings, that they felt that, okay, if I land on gov.uk and I've got a problem, so I've got a temporary health condition, then suddenly we've grouped their benefits. It's no longer this A to Z list. I can see what I need within those groupings. So that was a really key breakthrough for us, and that's a really starting point of a lot of our orientation work. We start to then think about, well, okay, once they've got a benefit, how do we route them through a journey? So we started to look at potential life events, like what do you do when I've lost my job? What do you do when you've suffered a work-related injury? And I'll come on to that a little bit more. So in terms of the actual digital work we've done, so we've brought together our common components and we've started to break our services down. We've talked about some of the orientation we've done, but fundamentally the thing for me about customer experience is that the way we're set up as an organisation is the thing that drives our experience. So as I said before, we were very siloed. We still are as an organisation set up in very siloed structures. So we have, teams solving problems on child maintenance, we have teams solving problems on different health benefits. So we've started to really think about, okay, how could we understand our customers through data and insight so that we can tailor and target support to them? How could we know more about them so that we could segment the offer to them? How could we personalize it? And ultimately, the more data we have, how could we start to prevent support? And that's been another really key driver for us. So our target operating model describes a department where we work together and we have a very clear value, a clear shared ambition that most customers start to interact with us digitally because that's their preference, but we'll never take away the choice of all of the other channels offered. That we want to really focus on our data and we want to use our data to automate and route people to the best experience for them. We also want to join up our digital systems, not only to make our customers have a better journey, but also because it would prevent fraud and error and reduce the rates down. And we also want to know more about how our customers live and where they need help and when they need it, so that in the future we can start to work with other partners, third parties, local authorities, to really think about how we could prevent that need ever coming to us. What could we do? And I think that's, really fundamental. And, as an organisation, we want to promote flexible working and we want to be accessible in everything we do. So we're doing a lot to influence our operating model. We've got some really key objectives, but I think for me, having the data and the user research together about our customers across the whole department and really raising that up to enterprise level. We've had a lot of data and user research at individual product level, but to raise that up into centralized dashboards to start to show our senior most leaders and our operational delivery leaders, this is really what's happening across our department. That's a really key step change for us. And I think that's the thing that will really drive where we want to be in the future. So we've got some high level targets for data. So some of the things we're looking at the moment, we're looking at digital propensity across the department and understanding who uses our digital services now, where's their skill level for each product line, what's the target level, where will they ever get to, and therefore what should the channel strategy be for those services. We're also starting to look at things like the cost to serve. So imagine where we've got 33% of users on more than one benefit. What's the cost to serve them where they have to tell us the information 2 or 3 times? And we've started to model things like around £4 million. If people could just stop ringing us every time to change their address, we think, our hypothesis would be we'd save an immediate 4 million just in the phone calls alone. We're looking at things like cost of experience. So what's the cost of over serving customers? So back to the cost to serve model, what's the cost in time? Not just in monetary value, but actually how long does it take a customer to go through those different stages, and how can we reduce that down for us and them? So we've got lots of ambitions around reducing our call volumes. We want, people to have to call us less because they don't need the reassurance. We also want to have more time for complex cases. We want to have a single point of entry for customers so that we move away from all of these separate systems and silos, and we want to automate wherever possible so that there's less human intervention. So one of the biggest things that we're about to launch, which I think is really exciting, is a pilot around voice of the customer. So the voice of the customer work is all around understanding where we are as an organisation and in knowing who our customers are. So we started to do some self-assessment around what we call a Gartner customer experience maturity model. So Gartner produced this as a kind of a key ways, 9 key themes that you could start to assess your organisation. So things like, do we know what our purpose and our strategy is? What's our governance around customer experience? What's our culture like? And when we started to measure ourselves, we've given ourselves fairly low scores. So for some, it's level 1. We think that we do some things well, some things not well. So you can start to see that we're really focused on self-assessment, understanding where the pressure points are, and anyone could use this. It's publicly available information, so you could start to use the Gartner model in your organisation to measure. So our challenge from our new Director General for Operational Delivery, Amanda Reynolds, was how do we get near real-time, high-volume customer feedback on all key touch points for a customer journey so that we can assess the systemic issues as well as trigger responses. So this was really fascinating to us. Amanda joined a few months ago, and this was one of the first things she asked us. How can she understand our customer journeys and our touch points? So again, we're not thinking about voice of the customer for a single product line. We want to see it across our full end-to-end journey. How are people coming in? Who's in a call queue? What's their experience in that queue? How are they at different, what we call kind of touch points along that journey and listening posts? So at different points in the journey, we'll listen out for feedback and then start to bring that in. So we've agreed at this point to start to model this in two of our service lines. And then once we've got to some understanding from those 2 service lines, we're going to start to roll out wider. And it's really about a systemic approach. So all focused around the customer. We've got our leadership team fully bought into this as a pilot. So it's about bringing together metrics and insights. And there's this concept of an inner and outer loop. So the inner loop being all around who the customer is, what the real-time feedback is for that customer. So when they call us, like direct feedback, sentiment, satisfaction, but then also pulling together wider insight we have across the department. So we have a panel that meets called the Serious Case Review Panel. They obviously deal with all serious cases, so people who end up having harmed themselves or being harmed by somebody else, so very serious outcomes for that individual. We're starting to look at, well, what's the root cause of that? We're looking at our disputes and our dissatisfaction as well. What do we know about why people complain, where a benefit decision's being made and then it's overturned? So we're starting to bring all of that together into one single viewpoint, and we've never done this before. So this is like a huge challenge for us, not just technically, but also culturally. This is going to be a really big step change around, well, what do we measure? Why do we measure it? So we're just starting to pull together customer experience metrics at this point around, ultimately what we measure is what we'll get out at the other side. So it's really key for us to be clear about, as a department, what are the things that matter to us, and make sure that the data correlates to those things. So, we'll have more to talk about in the future, but that's our next kind of big ambition. And I just want to end on a really key point for me, which is, we don't have all of the answers at this stage. So we are experimenting, particularly around areas like bringing a single view together of the customer. What we don't want to do ever is just take a sledgehammer to crack a nut, is kind of one of our favourite sayings. We don't want to bring all data together and flood our agents with too much information, because too much is just going to make it impossible for then an agent to navigate through our system. So we're starting to think about, well, what is the information we need at the right time? for the right type of inquiry, and how could we enable that sort of dynamic nature. And one of the things I touched on at the start was around life event routing. That was something we were really wedded to about a year ago, maybe 18 months. We really thought life events, that's the really big thing. Let's group everything into life events. But the more we research about our customers and the more we understand their journeys, the more we're starting to realise that customers don't have neat linear lives. And when you think about it, it would serve our purpose brilliantly if they did, that they had a need, they come to us, we serve the need, and then they drop off. But the reality is people often have changing needs through their life. So they might temporarily lose their job, have a temporarily have a health condition, have an accessibility need. So we have to start to think about that dynamic nature, and our component architecture and this move to microservices will help us. They're almost like the building blocks we can use to string together the right journey for that customer. So this sort of dynamic and this move to dynamic design is a massive challenge, not just in terms of how do we do that technically, because our systems, traditionally have been difficult to join up. So the component architecture will help, but also it's just around, well, what are dynamic journeys? How do we enable them? So I think, as I said, lots to learn, lots to experiment. So we're doing lots of test and learns. We don't expect to get it all right, but we're kind of being bold and being brave. And I think that's the key thing. So yeah, that's everything I was going to cover. So if anyone's got any questions, please just pop up your hand or pop anything in the sidebar. I'm happy to answer anything. Or if you don't want to talk about it today, that's fine. You can always message after. Alison, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really interesting, and I've written lots of notes down. It's really, really exciting what you're doing. And I'm particularly interested in, though, whether you can actually quantify the reduction in enforcement costs as a direct result of the work you've done to date. Is that possible?
We haven't. That's a really good question. So we haven't at this point really started to track because we're still so early in the journey. Mm-hmm. What we are doing though, so we're bringing in a lot of performance analysts. And I think that's a fair thing to say, Alison, that we're bringing in a lot of people who are going to help us with the frameworks with which we're going to measure some of the changes that we make. So our very first big transformational products going through our governance groups at this stages, when that gets through, we'll definitely have our performance metrics in place to start to measure. But that's really our first big thing. So I think our orientation work that we've done wouldn't necessarily impact our enforcement. But I think the more we start to get to the single view work and bring in together the data, that's when I would imagine the enforcement and certainly fraud and error changes we should really start to see some big impact there.
Great, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you. Any other questions for anyone? Andrew? I don't know if you want to come off mute. Still on?
So a notification popped up which hid the microphone. Fay, you said that the leadership were all bought into kind of the changes and the goals with this. Obviously, this kind of introspection is going to potentially make some people feel quite uncomfortable about, whether they're being measured, how they're being measured. How are you approaching the kind of cultural change and impact side of things? How are you sort of going from that point of immaturity to, I suppose, that point of maturity where this is seen as a good thing?
Yeah, and I think for me, the key thing is around showing. So we know that once we get to the performance around the voice of the customer, we're going to see the good and the bad. And we know that, interestingly, so apparently child maintenance services, one of the most dissatisfied from a customer level across government. So it has the worst satisfaction scores. So our operational director met with us yesterday, Arlene. We were talking to Arlene about it. She's embracing it because actually, if we can measure it properly, if we can baseline it properly, and if we can understand where that dissatisfaction is happening, then we can target interventions. So she's seen it as a really positive thing. I think up until now, we've had things like customer satisfaction surveys. they're just too general and they're too broad, and that you can't get to the specifics in the journey where the problems are occurring. So I think as a leadership team, you're absolutely right. There is a nervousness that we're going to highlight lots of negatives. But I just think the key message we've given is we've got to start somewhere, and that actually by lifting the lid on the problem and knowing where the problems start, and then we can all work together to start to fix it. So I think that's been the big driver, really. It's the hope that in the future it will help take us to a much better place.
Indeed. Great, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Siobhan?
Hi, Faye. Really, really interesting presentation. Thank you for that. And I too have taken lots of notes, which is great. What I'm interested in is this balance between, we're seeing fraud is on the increase, Faye, and it's quite worrying levels now. And DWP just published, a few weeks ago what those levels were now at. How are you and your team balancing your approach to fraud checks and the rigor that's required to know who you're talking to? Is it the right person? Is it the person that they say they are, versus the customer experience?
Yeah, and I think we take a really conservative view, is what I would say. So within our identity and trust space, we have, policy advisors embedded within the team, and we're very cautious, without a doubt. So a lot of the things that we might want to do ambition-wise, we take a very risk-based approach, and we'll often temper the ambition. So you're right, in some cases, the experience suffers because ultimately, though, people want their information to be kept safe. What we have found is that where we want to increase levels of security check or identity check, people accept that. And that's generally within our user research, we found that people will say, oh, you're asking a lot of questions, but I understand why you're doing that, because you want to make sure that I'm the right person. So I think what we're finding is that customers who have no intention of fraud, who want to kind of enter the service properly, then they're quite happy with all of the additional questions and security we put in place. I think, we're constantly trying to keep things in a healthy balance, but I think it is a challenge. And, some of our ambitions in the future around biometrics, we've thought about apps to help with that. We're just constantly thinking about, well, what level of risk does that introduce for us? And we also think that we think of fraud and error as very different things in the department. We know that there's a lot of unintentional error happening all the time. We saw an interesting thing in our user research recently where people said, well, I've got more than one benefit, and I told you that I went into hospital and I rang up one benefit line, and I didn't think I had to ring another benefit line because I assumed you would have known that. And that had driven, in that example, some accidental fraud in the other benefit line, which was affected by that hospital stay. So we're constantly thinking about how can we simplify and join up the experience so that customers don't accidentally create an error for themselves. And, we think we should have the responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen rather than put the onus on them. So I think there's lots of things we're doing to improve experience for customers, but particularly joining up data and insight about the customer and their journey will help prevent fraud and definitely reduce error rates.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
I've got a few in the sidebar there, Faye. I think if you scroll back, we've got Jenny Nelson asking how many people have a very simple versus complex experience with DWP?
Yeah, and it's hard to answer that one, Jenny. So it's a bit of a balance. As I say, the most complex journeys for us are the people who are in receipt of multiple benefits. So that's around 33%. Of our user base, but we also have a really high level of churn. So people, for example, who might be out of work for a while, so they come on to universal credit, then they get a job, which is great, but it's a short-term employment opportunity, maybe three to 6 months, and they come back to us. So that in some ways in itself is quite a complex journey, because we often treat that person as if we've never dealt with them before. So there's a lot of repetition of information given. So we're starting to really get to grips with that data insight about what is that churn, what is that behavior. But yeah, I mean, the complexity is quite high for a lot of people, I would say. I think probably the simplest journey we have is our pension experience, or our state pension seems to be people claim their pension and then they don't do a lot of change after that. And obviously once you've claimed it, you're not going to unclaim it. So it's a very stable group. Our child maintenance group's quite stable. Once you've applied for child maintenance and you're in receipt of it, it doesn't tend to be too volatile for the majority of people. But I think, you know, across the whole estate, there's a lot of complexity, sadly, which is going to make our job a little bit more interesting, I think.
Cool. And I think the next one came from Tom Dixon, who's saying, in the future, what about links to other public sector and charity support for citizens in the future? For example, district housing, CAB, health. Would that be an aspiration?
Yeah, we're doing a lot at the moment. I mean, and we always have, I think it's fair to say. So we've got groups that talk to our third parties all of the time, national partnership groups. And we do a lot with citizens advice. We do a lot with domestic abuse charities. I mean, they're the types of places we go to learn the most about our customers. We know that a lot of people rely on third parties for support before they even come to us, or support to help navigate our complexity. So we do a lot with the partners. We talk about how could they be part of this journey. And a classic example would be, you know, how could we give a third party an authentication route so they can act on behalf of somebody and represent somebody. So yeah, there's a lot where I think at the moment there's a lot we do, there's more we could do. And I think in the future, once we start to really redesign journeys, we can start to think about how do we bring them, or maybe devolve some of the journey to them officially. So we acknowledge that people go there first, and then what does that experience look like? So yeah, we definitely want to do a lot more. That's definitely in our vision, and a lot more across government. So things like gov.uk have created a personal account. So we're thinking about how do we link with that? We don't want to create our own personal account in DWP. So how could we link to a government layer level 1? Because sometimes the customer journey is across government, isn't it? And there's initiatives like single sign-on across government as well. So we're part of that working group. So we're always thinking about the ecosystem beyond us. And I think that's really important because, again, people don't just land at our door. They land at other places first before they get to us. So we're very aware of that. Hopefully that answers that one, Tom.
Cool. Then I think we've got Ian Vaughan next. How do you plan on using data and insight, i.e. how do you plan to get data from legacy systems, cleanse and join in the data to create a single view? And how will you present it via Power BI?
Power BI, yeah. So what we're doing at the moment, Ian, our first tactic has been around joining up a customer view for our internal colleagues. So the first thing, so we do have products already that provide this sort of an interface for an agent that calls upon our central information system. So at the moment, that central information system holds all key information about our citizens. So we're starting to think about that would be our key interface in the short term. That's our legacy estate. But the other things we're doing, because we're moving to this component architecture, data will be held in lots of places around DWP. We're moving away from this kind of centralized view. So we'll be calling upon some of our newest common components. So payments is a key one. It's actually one of the second biggest ranking reasons people call us, is to check when am I going to get paid and how much am I going to get paid. So we've got a payment service. It's a brand new digital service we've just stood up. So we're starting to think about how we link to that. So less about the legacy in the future and more about interfacing to microservices that provide specialist and targeted information, but presenting that as one single interface so that, you know, an agent won't know all of the different API calls that are going on in the background. I think when we get to things like the insight dashboards and the view of the customer and their customer experience metrics, yeah, we will be starting to think about visualizations, Power BI, but because we're just moving into a pilot, we haven't got those designed yet. So I suppose, Ian, it's still in design, it's still up for grabs how we'll do that.
But I think we've got a couple more. Is from Mark Nicholson. For the long-term plan, do you have partners for the solutions you plan to implement?
So I think we don't in all cases, Mark. We do in some. So we did some market engagement just last week on the voice of the customer work. So we've just really started to launch that as a theme of work. So we don't, at the moment, we work a lot with contingent labour to, if I'm honest, to bolster our teams, because we don't have enough internal headcount to manage all of this work. So we have started to do some market engagement just to raise the awareness of the work we're about to do, and we will be coming out officially with tender opportunities to get involved. So if anybody's interested or representing a company who could help, we always love to hear from companies about, you know, what you could offer, where you could offer it, and we're always happy to start that conversation.
Fab. Next is Tom Dixon again. Are you running services on the same platform, or, as I assume, do you have different technology platforms? How are you making this join up happen, adopting standards and interoperability?
And again, Tom, I think this is all about our vision of lots of microservices and common component infrastructure. I think all of our services have really been broken down into their component parts now. So the idea is that, yeah, we do have different technology platforms, although we are all moving to the same platform. So I think, again, it's that difference between the legacy estate we're moving away from to the new world. The new world for us is still evolving. Our architects broke down all components as they saw it. And we do have what we call an application reference architecture. We've got product teams now stood up for all of those different things. So, you know, it varies from things like an identity service, a payment service, a task service, a routing service, a notification service. So everybody is stood up now. We're building all of these components, but for some, they're more mature than others. So we own signposting as a service, for example. We haven't really started to think about yet exactly what that looks like. So I think, to be honest, Tom, the ambition is, yeah, that we move to the same platform, that they have the same standards, and that they will be interoperable. We think APIs will be the main way that we'll each call upon each other's services when we need it. But that's the, you know, just depends on the service, I would say. We say this a lot, it depends, because it really does depend on how they'll blend together. And we're working really closely with our digital service teams who are designing those end-to-end journeys and starting to think about, well, how does all of this piece together? What we don't want to do is just create loads of Lego brick mentality of just, well, we're just going to lump it together, because that won't work. So we've just had our first run through of our first sort of services who've used those component parts, and we've just started to see, well, what does that look like as an experience? How does that work? Because, you know, we've never built in that sort of fragmented way before, which is exciting, but it's all a big challenge at the same time.
And I think there's one more that's come through from, I think, Titus Asher. Could you speak some more about the ideal for data and automation in the target operating model on slide 16? I think the aim is to automate simple tasks, freeing up agents and frontline staff for tasks requiring empathy and judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is exactly it. So it's interesting. Simon McKinnon, our CTO, often says that when we design services now, the first thing we should do is design the service as though no agent or no person would be involved. So start always assuming that it could be automated and processed as a straight through experience, and then start to add in people when you can see that actually automation won't work. And I think that's a really healthy mindset for us. So we do think about, you know, how is, like, what's the art of the possible in this space? What could we do? And then start to think, well, someone might struggle there, or we know that the digital propensity is low, so they're likely to move on to its telephony channel. But there are some services, so things like Get Your State Pension was one of the first to allow for full straight through processing. So somebody, you know, the front end interface linked straight to the back end, did a calculation, made a payment of pension without any person being involved. So I think our big strategy is all around automation first, and then start to design in interaction. And again, that's really driven by wanting to support people. So the more complex somebody's needs or inquiries, the more we want to free up people in our operational delivery to help them. So it's kind of, for us, a massive win-win. It means the customers get a slick experience when they can use that sort of channel. When they need somebody, then they're not going to be held on long wait times, and it's a much better job satisfaction for our operational delivery agents, where it's not, you know, a repetitive task over and over again, that actually they're speaking to people who they can really help and make a difference. So I think the automation is really important. It's absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to do.
I think that's all the questions. Or is there someone else?
Oh no, just a thanks.
Yeah, I think that's it for questions. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Faye. And thanks everyone for attending. As I mentioned at the start, we've got a few more sessions happening later this week that are all on the Digital Leaders website. And I believe Digital Leaders will be sending out the recording of this session to everyone who'd registered, so you can watch it back at your own leisure. Yeah, and again, if you're interested in what we're doing at DWP Digital, check out the podcast that we've got, which you can get on all of Apple and Spotify and every podcast place. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much. Enjoy your day. Bye.